Well, Andy, when you look back at your journey into apologetics, were there any intellectual or spiritual crises that really helped shape that calling?
Oh, Riley, what an amazing question. Not so much. Well, maybe part crisis, kind of part certainly a big moment that shaped it. So for the big moment for me, which really shaped it, was until the late 1990s. Riley, I hadn't really thought about apologetics. Actually, probably never heard of it.
And so, how old were you in that era?
Oh, in that era, very good question. So I was born in 1972, so I'd have been
Okay.
about 25, 26.
Okay. So,
So
right in those formative years of
yeah, so I hadn't
faith
really
and
heard about this
crusades.
kind of stuff. And then one day, a guy came to our church and he did a seminar on reaching and understanding Muslims. There's a guy called Jay Smith. People can find Jay online. He's quite big on YouTube these days. And he did the seminar on reaching Muslims. And he described, Riley, how every Sunday afternoon he was going up to a place in London called Speaker's Corner, part of one of our big parks in London, England, where you can stand on a ladder or a box, get a crowd, and people go there and they talk about religion, politics, sport. Huge crowds come, especially in the summer. It's a big tourist attraction. And he'd worked out there were lots of Muslims there, so he was going to preach to the Muslims. And after his seminar, we got talking, and Jay said, "Why don't you come to Speaker's Corner next week, Andy, and see what we do?" So I turned up at the train station the following weekend. There was Jay with two ladders, Riley, two ladders, one on each shoulder. I said, "Why have you got two ladders?" He said, "Well, Andy, you're going to stand on one and preach, and I'm going to stand on the other and preach." I said, "Jay, I've never preached on the street before." He goes, "Oh, Andy, it's easy. Any idiot could do it." I said, "I've never really talked to Muslims before." He said, "Oh, Andy, they're easy to talk to Muslims, and not hard at all." Well, he was wrong, Riley, on both counts, because those Muslims had lots of questions and objections to the Bible, to Christianity. I'd never even heard this stuff before. It felt like being like machine gunned with objections. And I remember getting down from the ladder thinking, I guess, I don't know, do I become a Muslim? I mean, they seem to have everything. I have absolutely nothing. And so I remember going to the Christian bookstore the following morning, talking to my friend who worked there, and I shared my sad story. And he said these immortal words. He said, "Andy, what you need, mate, what you need is apologetics." I said, "What's that? Never heard the word. Sounded like a breakfast cereal, something very healthy." But no, as you know, it turns out apologetics is the branch of Christian theology concerned with giving answers. So I bought my first books and I was off. So it was Muslims and Speaker's Corner and being deluged with questions while up a ladder. Riley, that's where it started.
That's really getting thrown in the deep end. I mean, that's
Oh my
and
word, it's the
that's
deep end
very
with sharks and piranhas.
it's very George Whitfield-ish.
I suppose so. But I mean, yeah, yes, maybe something like that. But it
I
took
mean,
that
minus the
crisis,
apologetic piece. I mean, just the open air.
the open air
Uh,
piece, and Speakers Corner still exists. So anyone
okay.
listening to this is want to come to London, you can do that. And so yeah, I suppose that was the crisis in a
Okay.
sense, was being thrown into a completely new situation, which I never even thought about.
Well, maybe from your own experience of, your foray into apologetics, what do you think Christians often misunderstand about the very purpose of apologetics? Uh,
Yeah,
like, is it primarily proclamation, formation, persuasion, something else
yeah.
entirely?
Oh my word, that's about six questions rolled into one. That's brilliant, really. Here's the first thing I'd say. I think one of the big problems is most people have never heard of it. I was
Okay,
not unusual in that story, right? I often come across people who, when you say the word, go, "What is that?" And in fact, at Solas, the ministry I lead here in the UK, we don't use the word apologetics.
okay,
It's buried, it's there. We actually use a phrase I borrowed from an American friend of mine when I think it was the first person I heard use this. We use the phrase persuasive evangelism. Because you say to someone apologetics, often their eyes glaze over.
sure.
If you say to someone, "Hey, would you like to be a bit more persuasive in your evangelism?" Most people are like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds good. How's that work?" What you need. So a lot of people don't know what it means. It's also then I think associated sometimes with sort of ivory tower, philosophers debating things that no one cares about. So when I eventually went to Bible college to do my first degree in theology and philosophy, 3 years after that Speaker's Corner story, and I really gotten into stuff then. I remember my mum, who'd been a Christian probably by this point for like 50 years or more. When I would use the word apologetic, she's like, "Oh, you're going to become one of those ivory tower Christians of no practical use to anybody, aren't you?" So she didn't see it as a positive thing.
Mhm.
She saw it as a negative thing, and that's not uncommon. So there's that issue that we've got to fight and battle with. Then I think there's the issue that a lot of Christians haven't even begun to think about the fact that faith is something you give reasons for. I know, I mean, a lot of Christians who I think sort of think, well, you believe because you believe because you believe, and I suppose the best I can do is say, "Hey, Jesus." Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the gospel is, "Hey, Jesus,"
Sure.
but if somebody says, "But why Jesus?" then you've got to be able to do more than just go, "Oh, I don't know." Um, which leads me to your last question: where does it belong? I think it does primarily belong in evangelism. I'll be
Yeah.
really honest. I do sometimes get nervous when I'm at, say, a conference or a training session, and I meet someone who's like mad keen on apologetics, and I get like, oh, this is brilliant, and then I'll say to them, so how's this helping you in conversations with friends? And they'll go, oh, I've never talked to a non-Christian. I've spent all my time in my in my basement, eating pizza and reading William Lane Craig books. And I'm like, well, that's great, but I think Bill would want you to take that stuff and use it. So I think primarily it's evangelistic. And by the way, if you to get all technical, if you look at where
Yeah.
the word apologia, the Greek word from which we get apologetics, turns up in the New Testament, it turns up when Paul is in Acts defending himself before I forget which of the various authorities, is it Felix or one of that lot? And he stands up and gives his defense, Acts 26, apologia. So he's talking to non-Christians. And then, of course, 1 Peter 3:15, always be willing to give a reason, apologia, for the hope that you have when you're talking to non-Christians. Now, there is also an internal strengthen disciples piece, but I think primarily it's designed to be used externally. And so if
Yeah.
all you're doing is gorging on apologetics but never talking to somebody, I think it'll help you slightly, but it's designed to be used. Analogy I use in one of my books, I'm a mountaineer and a climber. I mean, I love the outdoors.
Oh,
Um,
that would be a whole nother conversation. That's
Another conversation.
my
Yeah,
passion.
but
But
I'm not like a rock extreme climber. So up to about
yeah.
60 degrees, I'm happy. Beyond that, I'm like my daughter's the rock
Yeah,
climber.
I relate to
But I
that too.
love gadgets, and the other
Yeah.
year, I finally bought an ice axe.
Okay.
I brought this thing back from the store, and my wife said, "What did you buy that for?" I said, "Oh, look how good it is, man!" And it was on special. She's like, "But you don't ice climb. When are you going to use it?" I went, "Oh, I'll need it. I'll need it. Trust me, trust me." Well, she was right. It's hung in the attic for 5 years, looking really impressive, but I've never used it in anger. And I think apologetics can be a bit like that. It can sort of sit there on the shelf and we can go, fantastic, look at all these resources I've
Yeah.
got. But unless you've actually gone and used it in talking to somebody, then it's a bit like the ice axe. It looks nice, but it
Yeah.
isn't doing what it's designed for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, feel like now that you're saying that, I meet a lot of people that are passionate about apologetics, but it's turned inward. Like I love these things because they make an apologetic for my own soul, kind of like a defense for my own skepticism. But
Yeah, and
sometimes
that's
that
not unimportant,
outward
is it?
piece is maybe
Yeah.
missing. Yeah, an
I mean,
important piece for sure.
pastorally, I mean, particularly in younger settings, I often say to, churches when I'm speaking in a church setting, for young people, youth, young adults, students, particularly, and then for young Christians, a little bit of apologetics to know that there are good reasons why that we hold these things true. But then that has to be then followed, I think, Riley, with there are good reasons why we hold these things true,
Hmm.
good reasons for taking the Bible seriously, good reasons to believe in the life, death, resurrection of Jesus. But now you're confident. Use that confidence to go somewhere. Go and talk to a friend, talk to a classmate, talk to a colleague, and be confident that if they ask a tough question, here are some great answers. And by the way, if they ask a question you don't have the answer to, don't worry. There are brilliant women and men in the church that God has gifted us with who will have the answer. Just need to do some work. But you see the point. The confidence is confidence for what? I don't think apologetics should just be so we can sit there in our quiet time in the morning going, I can now pray to God
Yeah.
with confidence. I think that should come from the inner witness of the Spirit and just reading the Bible and those classical spiritual disciplines. But it can certainly give us confidence to get out there and do the job of sharing Christ.
Would you say that apathy is a barrier, is a greater barrier today than atheism?
Do you mean in sort of in culture more widely?
Yeah.
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 Um, Now here's the interesting. I mean, I don't know how the differences are between obviously, you're a Canadian now living in America. I'm a Brit who has lived in Canada and knows America relatively well. But obviously there are cultural differences here. So I would have said yes for a long time. And
Yeah.
when I do church-based evangelism training, I often do a session called Reaching the Apathetic. But one of the things that we're seeing change in culture right now, Riley, here is that round about age 30, maybe 35 is the tipping point. So people aged that age and above, you still get atheism pops up. And then maybe they read Richard Dawkins 10 years ago and some of those things come out. Some of them will be in the kind of I can't be bothered, I'm not interested category. You go younger than that. And what we're seeing is a much, much greater openness to spiritual things. There's a movement here in the UK that's come to be termed the quiet revival. I think
Okay.
the word revival is too strong. I prefer quiet awakening. Far more younger people, I think, would now say, yeah, there must be something more to life. And,
Yeah.
I wonder about God and maybe I should think about spiritual things. Now, they've got none of the Christian background. So you're starting from square one, but they're not going in, I don't care. They're
Yeah.
just like, I'm interested. Lots of stories of that happening on campus of Christian students inviting their friends to look at the Bible and their friends going, yeah, yeah, all right, I'll give that a go. I was speaking at a UK university a couple of nights ago, a place called Exeter University down in the southwest. This was amazing. They had 200 out to hear me. I was speaking on If God is Good, Why is the World Such a Mess? So
Okay.
200 people out. Lots of those were guests that had been brought. Afterwards, I talked to a couple of atheists, a couple of people who were agnostic with atheist leanings, or vice versa. Quite a few spiritual but not religious types, a few Muslims. But then what was even more amazing was not just that turnout. The night before, they'd had their carol service. So they'd had a bit of a diary mix up and put two big evangelism events in the same week. But they thought, oh, we'll just go with it and see what happens. Well, the carol service they'd had 1,200 out for, with lots of those would not be Christians,
Okay.
but people were willing to come along, and it was great. And then the second night, yeah, we had a smaller but more intense kind of time together. Lots of Q&A, and in the Q&A, yeah, I wouldn't say there was hostility. There were
Okay.
people challenging me. There were questions. There were, hang on, what about this? And how does this work?
But they weren't coming
They
to
would go,
the
oh, this is
event
all wrong.
just to
Science. No,
like I can nail Andy Bannister.
none of that. Well, that wouldn't be that difficult. But the point being is I think there's a hunger and an openness, and we're seeing that
Yeah.
across the culture. So I would say we are shifting from apathy is still a big problem,
Yep.
again, especially above a certain age, but below a certain age, I think the challenge for the church is going to be how do we engage that spiritual interest that's not manifesting as straightforward Christian stuff because these kids don't know the Christian faith.
Yeah, in that way,
So
it's not revival. It's like it's something new for them.
yeah, and the reason I challenge the word revival is revivals generally aren't quiet. So the moment you put
Sure.
the word quiet in front of something, it's a bit weird, kind of thing. It's revivals we generally know they're happening. Think of like in the UK, the Welsh revival, very famous period of church history in Wales where thousands of people came to Christ. I mean, it was everywhere. You couldn't miss it. Or in the USA, there's been sort of stuff that's happened on college campuses in the last year or so. And
Mhm.
my brain's gone. The very famous one where
Yeah, was it Asbury?
Asbury, thank you. I knew it began with A. I knew it said Abernethy. That's Scotland. Asbury, yeah. To go, okay, we could debate exactly what happened, but no one was going around going, "Is something happening?"
That's a good point.
Peop- God was showing up, venues were full. Didn't they have like a
Yeah.
worship service that ran for about 10 days straight
Mhm.
as new people came and other people left? To go, that's what revival looks like. It's usually messy, it's usually obvious. Um, Awakening, though, is a much better word. There's something going on. And I would say I've begun to see a bit of the same in the US as well. So I was in the US for 3 months early this year. I had a sabbatical. So the family, we came over and did 10 weeks, 11 weeks over there. And one particular college campus I spoke on when I was there, I didn't do a lot of stuff. I was supposed to be resting, but I spoke on a college campus in West Virginia and really interesting talking to one of to the campus worker, Campus Crusade crew. I think she was with. She said here at this university, I look after 4 year groups. So the fourth years, we've got about so many, 50, 60 in the Christian group. The third year, that was the fourth year. Third year, about 100. Second year it's about 130, 140. So the first year it's over 200. We struggled to find a room. So something is happening as you go down the ages. And
Yeah.
so I talk to colleagues, and there are other stories. So I'm encouraged, but I don't want to be complacent. We can't just sit there and go, well, we don't need to do anything.
Mhm.
I think someone's got to really engage with these kids, listen to their questions, the questions they're asking, not the questions of 10 years ago, certainly not 20 years ago. And the church, I think, maybe to rethink some things and going, how do we engage with people coming through the doors who've got no Christian background? 50 years ago, when someone came to Christ, they'd probably grown up in the church and they
Mhm.
knew a lot. But you'll get people coming through the doors of churches now who know nothing, absolutely nothing. So that means we've got to, rethink how we teach, how we train, how we disciple.
That's what I was
Exciting.
wondering. Like maybe this is semantics, but just thinking, oh, maybe it's not exactly revival in that these are like almost like they have no background of
Hmm.
belief. So it's not like reviving something that's already there, but it's like these are almost unengaged
Yeah,
or
I
unreached
like
people
that.
that were started
Yeah.
fresh with.
And that's
Is
a good
it?
way of phrasing it, isn't it? I mean, when you look at what happened in the early church, right, when the church went from being 120 people on the day of Pentecost to, what was it, 30 million people by AD 300? If you take Rodney Stark, the historian's figures, we went to 51% of the Roman Empire. Was that a 300-year revival? Because it changed the Roman world and millions came to Christ. Probably revival was the wrong word for the reason you've described. They weren't coming back. They were people coming in who knew nothing. They were pagans. They were Greeks and other stuff. I mean, my word, the discipleship must have been messy
Yeah,
in the early church. In fact, we know it was because look at the letters look at the letters of Paul, the stuff he has to
sure.
deal with.
Yeah,
It's easy to slag off the Corinthians, for example, for some of their foolish ideas, but these are first generation Greeks
yeah,
coming in. No wonder they're getting mixed up, and there's
yeah,
bits of paganism coming in, and Paul's going, no, 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 it's not that, kind of thing. So we've got a template to show, or think of mission fields where the gospel is advancing. Some
hmm
of those giants of William Carey or whoever taking the gospel in the 1800s, whenever it was, to new parts of the world. Not dissimilar, right? You're engaging people who are coming in from outside, and I think that what's going to happen now is the church in America, Canada, Europe. We're going to have to switch more into that first contact mission mode that
okay,
goes, this is great. God's on the move, but boy,
yeah,
it's going to be messy
yeah,
as people come in with all kinds of ideas, not knowing,
yeah,
you know, we'll have to deal with all of these things. You'll get people, trying to combine manifesting and Christianity or something because it'll never have occurred to them you can't. And the answer will be not for us to get angry, but to go, right, let's have a little
yeah.
conversation here.
Uh, I think you already kind of mentioned this, but how have the questions then, in
Hmm.
your experience, in your trajectory of apologetics, how have the questions that young
Yeah.
people are asking changed, or has simply the emotional weight behind those questions shifted?
Hmm. I think it's both those things, Riley. So I would
Yeah,
say, sort of 15 years ago, right, when I started in full-time public ministry doing this, up in Toronto was where I kicked off this kind of stuff. And to go, then we were at the height of the new atheism, right? So Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, came out in 2006, I think.
yeah,
Certainly it was 2006 that Wired magazine coined the term like new atheism. And to go, so if you're dealing with young people, a lot of the questions were that kind of, religion poisons everything. It's all total rubbish. Science has buried God. Jesus was a myth. I mean, all of this new atheism stuff just sloshing around. That's what we were dealing with. And by God's grace, I think that, we as in the church dealt with it really well, really good responses and engagement. People came to Christ through that period. It was tough, but I had, friends who were former new atheists come to Christ and stuff, and exciting to see. Then I would say a couple of things happened. The new atheism began to wane. I mean, this was already happening before COVID came along.
yeah,
We'd reached peak atheism, and I think a number of reasons. Firstly, and funnily enough, by the way, I wrote a book responding to the new atheism back in 2014 called The Atheist Didn't Exist, and we just this summer did the updated 10th anniversary edition of that. So this is fresh in my mind because the first chapter, one of the new chapters we wrote was what happened to the new atheism, and I think they forgot they were a cultural fad. I think Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens, Dennett, they like to think, wow, people love us because this is real and we're smart. We figured it all out. But cultural fads, man, they come
mm,
and go. Just ask the inventor of the fidget spinner. You know, the media particularly gets all on something, and then people get bored. And I
mhm,
think firstly, people got bored of the new atheism, and then secondly, people began to say, well, hang on a minute. It's all very well to put adverts on the side of buses. There's probably no God to stop worrying and enjoy your life. But hang on a minute. Okay, there's no God. But what do I do to enjoy my life? Life is actually pretty sucky, really. It's, life is complicated and difficult. And so the new atheists chased God out, but never replaced him with anything. And I think that void opened up. And then along comes COVID. And suddenly, people's world is turned upside down. Kids are going, oh, hang on, I thought the world was safe and straightforward and easy and it was going to get better and better. And now suddenly I'm being told I might die and I'm being locked up and I can't go out and all these freedoms and things I thought I had, it's all been turned upside down, because it turns out that, humans are mortal. So I think COVID did a massive body blow to,
mm,
everything's getting better. And then, particularly in Europe, we had things like Ukraine. So we had, okay, a lot of people thought the world was getting more and more peaceful and, all the world's conflicts are over. Well, suddenly in close succession, you had the war in Ukraine, you had Gaza, you got resurgent China. So if you're a young person looking at it right now, it looks scary. I mean, is Putin going to go nuclear? I, as a kid in the 1980s, used to lie awake at night worrying about nuclear weapons. Today's kids are lying awake worrying about nuclear weapons. And so I think When you're fearful for the future, that changes things. A lot more emphasis in our culture on mental health and anxiety. So a lot of kids, I think, are sort of asking themselves those kind of questions. So all that to say, now the kind of questions we see more commonly from young people would be the more existential ones, like where is God when I suffer? How can I find hope for the future? What's the purpose of life? What does happiness look like? Is everything going to be okay? Um, those kind of questions, a lot more interior kind of ones, and you see less of the kind of has science buried God. So I'd
You
say
mentioned.
that there's been gone.
Oh no, I was just gonna say when you say we kind of grew bored of the new atheism, would you say that is because, and maybe Dawkins and Harrison, these guys didn't necessarily realize it, but because atheism was stripping things away from us and that we were somewhat at the moment happy with, but it wasn't giving anything in return. I just think of this. I
Yes.
always think of this one example that I just thought was hilarious. It was on I forget which news channel, but they had the banner guy. I don't know, the leader of the Humanist Foundation or something like this.
Right. Yeah.
He was on the news and he was talking about how they had won a victory, for the world in that they'd gone into these schools and then they had stopped them from doing Operation Christmas Child
Oh
because,
yes. I.
tied
I.
up in
re-
that was the proselytizing of the Christian faith. And he was, so victorious that they had stopped this. But the news anchor, who wasn't even a believer, was like, okay, you've taken that away, but now what are you doing instead? And he was like, oh no, no, the Humans Foundation, we don't dabble in philanthropy or these kind of things. And then the news
I
anchor
know. Eh?
made this really, I think hilarious comment that something like, well, if his name was Charles, it wasn't, but like, thank you, Charles. These children will sleep warm at night knowing that you have taken away the threat of Christian tenets or something
I
like
know.
that.
It's a go.
But
Let
just,
me describe that story right. Of going, it's bonkers, isn't it? Of going,
yeah,
who you think whoever's doing PR for these guys are going, yeah. At the very least, you should have replaced it with something. Other than
sure.
that, going,
Yeah.
yeah, no toys for you this Christmas. But
Yeah.
funny thing is, I'm just finished prepping a big Christmas evangelistic talk I've got in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm using Dawkins partly
Okay.
because there's that the wonderful line in one of Dawkins' books where he says, but belief in God is like belief in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. Most people grow out of the first two, kind of thing. And aside from the fact that basically he's not merely is he attacking God in a bad way, he's also attacking Father Christmas. And to go, I don't know how it is in the USA. If you as a public speaker attack Santa, you're toast. To go, they're going to come for you. So I've actually got
Yeah.
this slide I'm doing, which is this morph of half of it. It's a Dawkins face and the Grinch
Okay.
kind of morph together. And I'm just going to say, sorry to any young people in the audience. Clearly, Dawkins here is just, is auditioning for the role in the next Grinch movie.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee people will laugh because it's like, how utterly cheerless. Not merely
Hmm.
is it a terrible argument, there's massively better evidence for God than for Father Christmas.
Yeah.
Just even, to go, just leave young people alone.
Yeah.
just
Yeah. But do you
but
think
yeah,
that's an example
yeah,
of a wider thing that like
yes. Oh
atheism
yeah.
just it didn't give you anything?
Well, it does one of two things, I think
Okay.
atheism did. And I had a lot of fun updating the atheist book. You get two things right, Riley. The first one is you get this really bleak, nihilistic version of it. So Dawkins, famously also said, we are lumbering biological robots. Lawrence Krauss, Arizona State University, we are a 1% bit of pollution in the universe. Alex Rosenberg, author of The Atheist Guide to Reality, just, there's no meaning, there's no point, there's no free will, history is nonsense, everything's doomed, everything's meaningless, there's no good, there's no bad, there's no evil, live as you want, effectively. To go, there's a reason these guys aren't motivational speakers, because this is grim. Um, but the other hand, you get atheists who, sort of skip through life, assuming you can throw God out and still have meaning and purpose and
Hmm.
rainbows and kittens and unicorns. Because you mentioned there that the humanist guy. I mean, humanism is a joke in some ways because it's like, well, we don't need God, but we can still have all these other things that traditionally have been built upon God.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of atheism behaves a bit like, you sort of come along and built a lovely house, and then along comes the humanist and goes, "You don't need that foundation. Let me just dig your foundations out. You can still have your house, not
Yeah.
a problem at all." In fact, I end the last chapter, which is also a new one in the updated atheist book. I retell Jesus's parable of the wise and foolish builders because it's rather like the sea of faith went out, leaving these flat sands of skepticism, and along come humanists going, "Hey, let's build a castle on that sand. We can really build something quite exciting." But actually, it turns out you do need rock occasionally. And I think now the sea of faith has turned and begun to come back in again. A lot of humanists are getting very wet feet because they
Okay.
tried to build things out of nothing. So I think you get those two trends. Either a kind of like, don't ask the questions, we can have all the stuff we built traditionally on Christianity, or you go the other way and get very nihilistic. And I think people are looking at both and just going, yeah, this doesn't work. We need
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah, because the example I think in that guy on the newscast was like he's still thinking we can have joy, but the newscaster is understanding you've taken away the things that are giving the kids joy that are giving the gifts and the joy of the kids receiving the gifts. Like you've, you know,
Yeah, and the bizarre thing about that, right, is I mean, I don't want to give these guys ideas, but it occurred to me with someone who does work in communications, you could have done a much better job there. Either you set up an alternative shoebox
for
thing,
sure. Yeah.
or the alternative, even stand there and go, you know what? I think what they do with the toys is brilliant. Good on them. But we're concerned about the proselytizing and we're campaigning
Yeah.
to get them to stop that and let the shoeboxes keep going
Yeah.
and just make your point. You'd have scored your point. The interviewer would have probably been more open to you because you're being positive and going, well, I love the
Mhm.
fact they're doing the toys, but instead you go for this nuclear take no prisoners.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when Dawkins first got going and was running around saying things like religion poisons everything. And even people who are just, no faith at all were able to go, but hang on a moment. I mean, I'm not into religion, but to go, surely they gave us hospitals
Yeah.
and literacy and human rights and universities and things. Can't we say religion's done lots of good things, but we've outgrown it.
Yeah.
Let's move on. I think it was the new atheism went for this kind of take no prisoners, scorched earth policy,
Yeah.
end up looking ridiculous. And now, of course, the field of play is totally open. And
Yeah, this
Christian
the humanist guy would have been a microcosm of that, of Dawkins being like, "Hey, let's celebrate. We got rid of the hospitals and all the, the theology
Yes,
behind it."
exactly.
People are like, "Well, we
Yeah.
still need a hospital."
And I
Yeah.
think it shows that, I mean, the spiritual point, because I think there's always a spiritual point behind
Hmm.
everything, right? Is human hubris. I mean, look back to the Tower of Babel in Genesis, right? The humans there have ignored God and they've thought, I tell you what, we can build this tower and we're so good, we can get it right up to the heavens. And I love that sort of little sort of bit of humor because we miss the humor in the Bible. They're busy building the tower up, and it describes God then came down
Yeah.
to look, and they were trying to build up, and got anywhere, and then just God just goes, what are you guys doing? And just it ends in rubble and dirt. And so often that's the story of humanity. We
Yeah.
go, we don't need God, we can build something much better. And usually when humans have tried that, it's gone badly wrong. So for all of those reasons, I think we're in very, very interesting times. And the challenge for the church is let's make sure we're answering the questions that people are asking today and not the questions they were asking 15, 20 years ago. Because the danger for those of us who love apologetics is we just keep reading the same stuff from 20
Hmm.
years ago. Right, the books that I bought then, they're still on the shelves behind me, but there's a bit more dust on them because of going, people aren't asking those questions. I'm glad I know that stuff. It's I'm glad I've read lots of books on the cosmological argument. It's very exciting stuff, but very rarely am I asked about science and faith these
Hmm.
days.
I've appreciated that part about your talks and your writing, that your work is often, I feel like, blended rational arguments with humor and, I don't know, imagination. And clearly that's in your, I don't know, your philosophy of apologetics, that you like humor works.
Oh,
Uh,
bless you for thinking it's a philosophy. I think well, I suppose the serious God point. I stumbled into it by accident, partly,
okay.
Riley. Partly was I love the way that God's providence works, right? God often uses disparate things in your interests and draws them together in interesting ways, right? So I've always loved comedy. In
Okay.
fact, my first public speaking was stand-up comedy and magic. I used to love doing conjuring and card tricks when I was a teenager.
You were
So I
you were
learned
doing
how to stand.
you were doing
Yeah.
stand up and magic
Yeah, a little bit.
as a
Yeah, so I would
combined.
go around
Oh,
the local
that's neat.
scout huts and old
Okay.
people's homes doing, terrible magic shows, trying to make people laugh. And I learned how
Yeah.
to communicate. A lot of
Okay.
trial and error. In my case, mainly error by me and lots of trial for the audience. But you learn how to communicate.
Hmm.
Then then my first job in full-time ministry, I worked for the British Health Service for some years and did other bits and pieces. My first actual full-time job before apologetics was I did youth work and I
Okay.
worked for some churches in London. My job was to build connections to all local high schools. So I was seeing about 8, 9,000 kids a week, And look, if you're standing in front of 1,000 kids because you've been allowed to come and do a school assembly, you've got
Yeah.
5 minutes with a room with 1,000 teenagers, and the head's told you, by the way, don't be too blatant about God or you're not coming back. You've got to think fast. And so I began to learn, actually, if you can make people laugh,
Yeah.
they'll listen to you. If you get them laughing, then you can slip the truth in. And then the icing on the cake was I came across C.S. Lewis. Well, I'd come across Lewis before, but Lewis wrote a little essay on one occasion where he talked about the fact. He said often the front door of people's minds are guarded by watchful dragons, so you can't get truth through the front door because the dragons are guarded. But he said I began to wonder whether using story and narrative, and of course this was around the time he did Narnia and the
Okay.
Cosmic Trilogy. I wondered if you could tiptoe past the watchful dragons
Oh,
and come in
interesting.
around the side door. And when I read that essay, thinking that's interesting, I like that. I thought, well, I'm not a creative writer like Lewis is, but I have learned to be funny. So
Yeah.
maybe I can tickle the dragon under the nose, and while it's rolling on the floor, waving its legs in the air, laughing, just run through the front door anyway. And the serious thing is, humor disarms people.
Yeah.
What I would say is, I think for all of us, finding out the way that we communicate naturally
Hmm.
and then using that in your evangelism. So we're not all funny. Some people would say, Andy, you're not funny, but we're not all wired to be kind of this kind of style, but we'll have our own style. And so rather than go weird, when we talk to people, how do we use our natural style? And by the way, our natural hobbies. You mentioned you love the outdoors. If you're an outdoors person, go for a walk with a friend.
Sure.
If your hobby is, playing soccer, then, why not use that as an outreach and join the local soccer team? Because you have something in common to start with. If you're listening to this and you're older and you're retired and your interest is, I don't know, quilt making, well, don't join the local Christian, First Baptist Church quilt circle. Go and join the local town one and then sit there with other people who are not Christians with a shared interest. And that will give you a bridge because you can start from something that you have in common. And so I think we often forget about our hobbies and our interests and our abilities and the way God has wired us, and then asking the Holy Spirit, okay, what's the evangelism style that
Yeah.
I can do, rather than trying to be somebody else. Early on, I learned that the hard way. I remember looking at people like, say, Bill Craig, and going, man, look at him. There he is on the university stage giving these amazing debates with footnotes upon footnotes. I can't do that. And it took a little while for God to give me the kick up the backside and go, I'm not asking you to be Bill Craig. I'm asking you to be Andy Bannister and use your terrible sense of humor. Kind of thing. Or, in your case, Ryley, whatever it is,
Sure.
however you're wired.
Yeah.
And there's something about discovering our style in evangelism. And then evangelism becomes that little bit easier because you're doing it the way God has wired you, not the way he hasn't.
Yeah, yeah, those are really good points, and you bring a lot of that out in your writing. Can I ask you this? What do you believe Christians are compromising most today in order to fit into Western culture? And maybe
Ooh,
like maybe another way of saying that, like where are they resisting culture to in unhelpful ways?
yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, right? Because I think it can be both, can't it? And you say Christians. What are the challenges? I think it's different in different settings. It's probably
Yep.
different in the USA, in Canada, in the UK, and even in different places there. So something I realized years ago that can be at least a helpful way to begin asking that question, because maybe each of us have to ask, where can I be tempted to perhaps compromise?
Hmm.
And where can I be tempted to perhaps be a bit too like gung ho? And I remember sort of a psychologist friend talking about the fight or flight reaction. So we're wired that when danger approaches, if you're walking through Florida and I don't know, an alligator leaps out from behind the bushes or something, it triggers that reaction. And your adrenaline rushes and all this kind of stuff. And it's designed to do two things. Either you're going to fight the threat off, or you're going to run away as fast as you can. And I suddenly realized, oh gosh, as Christians, we do that with culture. So some big challenge comes. Some of us, it triggers the fight reaction. So we get shouty, we yell at the culture, we type in capital letters on the internet, and you want that typified without making value judgments for or against. Think of Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump on social media, that's Donald. It's the fight reaction. This is great. It's mega. I'm going to take that guy down. Capital letters. Donald has no fear. Sometimes one might suggest he might not be as subtle as the situation demands. And maybe as Christians, if we lead that way, okay, we might win the battle, but we might lose the person. We might lose the opportunity. So that's if you just lead with fight. And flight, of course, has its own set of problems. Where there's a challenge to our faith comes and we turn on our tail and we just run as fast as our little legs will carry us rather than engage the issue. So maybe the question is to be asking, given that whatever is going on in my culture, in my town, in my neighborhood, whatever is in front of me, am I more likely, am I at risk of being shouty and losing people,
Hmm.
or I'm more at danger of being too quiet and not speaking up? And the challenge, I think, is how do we speak the truth in love? So maybe it's an issue that we do need to take a stand on, but how do we do it in a way that wins the person behind the issue? And the other thought too, I've thought a little bit about over the years is sometimes we also engage very loudly issues that we can't change. So perhaps a good example might be, take an issue that's been massive in Western societies in recent years. Take the trans kind of issue, which is a huge concern for Christians, and lots of things linked off that issue. Um, well, you could, as a Christian, go onto social media and shout about it really loudly, but unless you're in politics or in something where you can influence, your shouting about it very loudly is not going to do anything other than cause potential problems. Although maybe your own tribe might look at you and go, "Yes, there goes a right-on person. You're just being a Pharisee, really."
Yeah.
You might be far better off writing a well thought through letter to your representative and saying, "I'm concerned about this issue." And if you meet an LGBT person in front of you, rather than perhaps lead with, "Let me sort out the trans thing first," maybe you should say, "Okay, let's grab a coffee. I'd love to hear your story, and I'd love to tell you about Jesus." Because ultimately, the issue you're concerned about, in this case, the trans thing, is only ultimately going to be dealt with when the Holy Spirit comes and change happens in a person's life, not by you typing in capital letters on Twitter. So you've taken a stand against the issue, but you've done it differently, and you've done it by leading it through Jesus rather than, separating it and trying to bang people around the head with it. So think about fight or flight, and that'll be different, I think, Ryley, for each one of us. Some of us need to perhaps, man up. For girls on listening, girl up. But I'm a man, so man up. And other of us maybe need to pipe down slightly.
What about the compromise piece? Are
Oh,
there
the
things that
compromise
you
piece,
see there?
yeah. Yeah, there can be a challenge, right? And to go that links into perhaps it links into both, doesn't it? If you're running away from an issue, the compromise is, okay, talking about Jesus in this situation, addressing the issue is might cost me something in terms of
Sure.
relationship, reputation, comforts. I'll say nothing. That then you've compromised. Um, but you can compromise the other way of going, well, okay, I'm going to go in here and actually, rather than do the hard work of engaging with the person in front of me and trying to understand and trying to understand how to communicate Christ, I'm just going to yell at them about this issue, largely because what I want is reputation from my own side. I want my fellow Christians
Yeah.
going, yes, there goes a
Hmm.
good person. And that's the Pharisees. The Pharisees were compromising. They were compromising one way, and there were other people in the society at Jesus at the time who were compromising the other way. They'd sold out. So you could sell out by, engaging in syncretism and trying to worship Jesus alongside other gods. You could equally sell out by being a Pharisee and just going out and yelling at everybody. Um, so yeah, so I think to me the big question is, and the big challenge, particularly in the West, is what does the gospel cost us?
Hmm.
Um, because one of the challenges, one of the privileges when you look more widely and look at the church around the world and where the church is really growing, um, often Christians in many parts of the world, being a Christian is costly. We like to imagine it's costly in the West. It isn't really. The most that will happen in the West is it might cost you your job, I suppose. That's not a small thing, but that's quite different to, in Indonesia or Iran or Nigeria. It can cost you a life. And maybe in the West we become just that little bit too comfortable as Christians, particularly around social awkwardness. I think Canadians and Brits are good at this. We don't talk about the gospel because we're afraid of it being awkward.
Sure.
So we say nothing. So that's a
Yeah.
compromise. But again, the answer is not to get all shouty. The answer is to take maybe 2 steps forward rather than 20 steps forward. So yeah, I think we compromise a lot around how we present the gospel, where we keep quiet, and we try and avoid awkwardness sometimes too easily.
Do you think Christians today, I mean, just kind of your perspective, and it's maybe asking you to be a little too general too, but do you think Christians today are less intellectually formed than previous generations? Or is the challenge simply a little different in a digital age?
Oh my word. Well, that's a great question. Um, yeah, I think we probably are slightly less intellectually formed. I suppose to be fair, Riley, that goes with the culture, right? I read some stat recently that said, what was it? I think 30, I'll get the exact numbers wrong, but I'll get the ratio roughly right. So I think it was 30 years ago, the average American, and I only pick on Americans because this was the article, it was in an American magazine, read something like 60 books a year.
Okay.
That was 30 years ago. 15 years ago, it dropped down to something like 20 books a year. And now I think surveys are showing the average American reads 3 books a year. Um, and I'm sure, to be absolutely crystal clear what I'm saying here, if you did the survey for Canada or the UK, we get
Yeah,
very similar
I'm
numbers.
sure.
Why? Firstly, television was the beginning of the problem.
Okay.
And then, of course, the internet has ramped that up. And now AI is ramping it up even more, social media. And so, as Christians, we get caught up in that. It's far easier to hang out online, doom scrolling of an evening,
Yeah.
than to sit down and go, I might do a little bit of work here. I might actually try and read and be thought through. Um, and the other thing that digital has done, of course, it's made life very busy. So again, wanting to be sympathetic and pastoral here, many people, right, are working in jobs where their email is always on, the phone is always going. Email was supposed to be a labor-saving device. That's a joke, isn't it? Really, most of us are drowning under stuff at work, and work spills out of just the office now because we've got our devices. So I think it's equally the busyness piece of people going, "When do I get the time?" So all of that, I think, has led, yes, to Christians being a bit less educated. One just anecdotal example I was struck by recently was that, realizing when I was growing up, I had the privilege of being raised in a Christian family, so I was brought up in the church and made my own commitment to Christ aged about 12, 13, but had the real joy of a Christian upbringing. And when I was a kid, in the late 70s, early 80s, so people do the maths now and date me, um, it was very common that you read Christian biography. So I grew up reading, The Cross and the Switchblade, David Wilkerson, and great missionary stories, Corrie ten Boom, and all this stuff. And that means you grow up with these great examples around you. There's a great cloud of witnesses to inspire you. It feels like, man, look, the Christian tribe, isn't it amazing? Um, my wife and I looked around recently and went, oh gosh, most of our friends at church, when you talk to them, have no idea who some of these names are because they're not. They haven't grown up in that setting, and they're not then sharing it with their kids. So Christian young people today are growing up with church is just me and my people with me on a Sunday. It's very thin. Um, and then no wonder perhaps there's a risk of them struggling when they get out into the world and it throws stuff at them that the roots don't get very deep. So that's the diagnosis. The challenge then is how we kind of push back on that. Reading is certainly one thing. So with we homeschool. So with our kids, we've really worked hard. We're not saying we're perfect by a long way. We've learned vast amounts from others. And by the way, we've introduced our kids to lots of Christian biography. There are some great resources out there to do that and other things. And then maybe the other thing is to go embrace the best of the digital. Let's not knock digital entirely.
Mhm.
Podcasting, right? Here we are. Wasn't a thing when I was a kid. Now there are an amazing array of really good Christian podcasts with amazing men and women behind them doing great content. So, the challenge is, okay, how do I use the digital space well? Don't spend your time doom scrolling and watching endless TikTok videos. But, if you're at the gym or on the commute to work, hey, get a really great podcast. It's going to equip you a little bit and stick your headphones in and use the time, redeem the time. And use those tools well, but it's going to require a little bit of thought
Mhm.
because the problem with the social media, AI age is if we're not careful, we get subsumed by the algorithm, and Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. We're just going to feed you junk. It's the equivalent of junk food, isn't it? Really, because they're interested in eyeballs and they can sell those to advertisers. We need to be people who go, no, I'm going to use YouTube, but I'm going to be selective, or
Mhm.
I'm going to hop onto, social media from time to time. And again, I'm going to be careful and I'm going to make it work for me rather than it just drive me like a hamster in a dopamine powered wheel.
Are there disciplines personally that without revealing, what exactly your prayer closet looks like, but like things that you have done or do personally that you would
Yeah. So there's a
encourage
couple.
others now in terms of even, apologetic wise, but also just,
Yeah.
a relationship with Christ in this digital age
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah. So,
tension.
yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I think three things have helped me and us as a family. So let's start with the family because we're just there just now. So one thing we built in, and we didn't know about this because I was raised in a Christian home. My parents never did this. So about 5 or 6 years ago now, we started doing a family Bible time. So at the start of each day, and it's not always easy. You've got a busy family kind of life. And if the start of the day doesn't work for you, pick another time. We get together with myself, my wife, my 2 kids. We sing something together. So it's Christmas now, so we're working through carols because the kids love carols. Do half a carol a day.
Yeah.
So we're into 2 verses of Once in Roll David City this morning. Then we work through a Bible book. So we're currently in Second Timothy, just on First Timothy. We do a chunk a day, read it, and then get the kids involved in what do you see, what do you notice, what stands out, and we just talk about it. And then we pray. together. And we try and do a thing where each of us pray. We thank the Lord for something, and then we pray for a situation that needs prayer. And that's built this wonderful spiritual foundation and rhythm to family life. So that's family. So if you're listening to this, you've got families, build that in, whether it's
Yeah.
just your husband and wife or kids or whatever.
How old are your kids? Just so I
My
can
kids
get an
are
idea of
13 and 10.
okay.
So we've just scaled it. So when we were younger, we bought books that would help us do stuff for their age.
Okay.
Now they're the kind of age we just read the text actually,
Okay.
and it's great because sometimes they'll ask a question. It was one this morning. They asked, I forget what it was, about how old somebody was. I think it was, oh, well, what were the, when was Paul arrested? Because obviously Timothy was written from prison. It's like, I don't know the exact date. That's a perfectly okay thing to use AI for. Let's
Yeah.
get Chat
Yeah. Yeah.
GPT to help us with that. Personally, yeah, I'm sort of old school, so I like to find most days if I can. I don't always make it every day. I mean, this is one thing I've learned years ago. Don't, aim for every day. If you don't
Yeah.
make every day, don't beat yourself up. But if you don't aim for every day, it's going to go worse. So, whenever I can in the week, multiple times, I'll sit down and I use the same style we do with the kids. I like to read the Bible and just think about it, pray, and then I also like to read a bit of devotional writing. And I'm a massive fan of one of my big spiritual heroes was a British guy who went down to Australia as a pastor in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and planted three churches. He was in New Zealand and then Tasmania, Australia. Then developed this amazing writing career and wrote devotional essays. He was Billy Graham's favourite devotional writer. Is a guy called F.W. Boreham.
Okay.
So, and Boreham has this amazing ability to make a devotional point of something very simple. So he'll just, so I like to read a little Boreham essay, wake the brain up, read the Bible, pray. Um, and then there was the third one in there. It's gone. There was at least another one somewhere. But those are the two sort of foundation planks. Oh, you said about reading. Yeah. So keeping the mind fresh. I realized a few years ago, Ryley, I'd probably read everything on apologetics I needed to read. I don't need to like reread another version of the same old argument. Sometimes, particularly if we like a writer, right, we go, oh, Bill Craig's got another book out, I'll read it. But actually, it's just an updated version of something that's gone before. Not picking on Bill, you could say the same
Sure.
me.
Yeah.
So I try and read widely. I try and mix in their non-Christian stuff.
Okay.
Sometimes interesting non-Christian stuff, because sometimes non-Christians say really interesting things. So there's a writer I've recently come across called Paul Kingsnorth, who's a really good cultural analysis. Is a Christian now, wasn't originally. So I've been reading some of Paul's stuff. Um, and then the other thing I've tried to do as someone who writes myself, so it's not necessarily for everybody, although, for some of us staying creative, I've tried to put a little bit of fiction into the mix
Okay.
as well. Again, to keep me thinking, because sometimes, if you're someone who works with words, if you're a preacher, listening to this to go, how do you keep yourself fresh? Well, read someone who writes really well,
Yeah.
and you'll occasionally go, oh, I love that phrase. I'm going to borrow that. I confess to partly being a Tolkien nerd as well, so I try and read Tolkien once a year.
Okay.
And so Lord of the Rings is a big
Just
interest.
through the three
Through Lord of the
once a year.
Rings, yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere in every 5 to 6 years. It's not an easy
Okay.
read. So
Okay.
I'm a bit slow this year. I only picked up Fellowship like the start of December, so I'm
Oh
not
yeah,
going to
you got a lot of ground to
I'm
cover.
not going to get through 1,000 pages by Christmas. I mean, I've got as far as the prancing pony
Okay.
so far. So I think we should be beyond Rivendell by Christmas, but it might be
Okay.
to Easter before I get to Return of the King.
Well, you
But
can
by the way,
stop
that's
me here.
appropriate because
Yeah.
fun Tolkien nerdy fact. If you look at the
Yeah.
appendices, the back of Return of the King, the Fellowship in Lord of the Rings, they leave Rivendell. They set out on the quest to destroy the ring on the 25th of December, and the ring goes into the cracks of doom on the 25th of March, which in the Old English calendar was the date of Easter. So
Oh,
Tolkien has set Lord of the Rings between
yeah.
Christmas and Easter
Oh, I've
very
never
deliberately.
picked up on
Do you
that.
not know that? Yeah, you need to go to the
That's
back of the
amazing.
appendices and go,
Okay.
yeah, it's a very Christian book, and right down to the dating framework that's in there.
You can stop me if this is too intrusive, but last one, are there any things that you and your wife maintain in
In
terms
terms
of
of our own sort of, yeah,
a
rhythms and things.
devotional type
Yeah. A full disclosure on that, Riley, we're learning. So I think we for a long time sort of did our own thing. We did our thing
yeah,
together with family, and we would obviously, we do our own devotions. We go to church together. But it's only in relatively recently, we've begun going. Do you know what we actually need to sit down, the two of us together, and pray, just the two of us together, which is not easy if you've got a house full of kids, because finding that
sure.
space. So that's always the challenge. I think some years ago, a friend gave me a book, which I forget the title of, but the idea behind it was that in your spiritual devotional life, there are times and seasons. and be realize that there are times when it's harder because it's busier. So when your kids are really tiny, like babies, it is pretty full on. Although the plus side is they're usually down by 8 o'clock of an evening. We're now entering the teenage years, and it's like my daughter doesn't go to bed till 9:45 on a Friday night. It's like we're knackered. But we've tried to teach ourselves, you know what? That very moment, that is the very moment to put the kettle on, sit down, pray
Mhm.
even 5, 10 minutes together through the day, and then move on. So we are learning that journey. It's kind of stuff. So and it's fun actually. It's quite a nice moment to pray together. And then we talk a lot. Because
Okay.
we read similar stuff. We both, well, she's not. It's not that she's not a thinker. She's not as deeply into it as I am. But we talk a lot throughout the day about stuff too. But yeah,
And
that's a very good.
as two Brits, do you connect on Tolkien?
It's funny. She's a Tolkien fan, but not a Tolkien nerd. So
Okay.
she hasn't read Lord of the Rings for about 10 years, I think.
Okay.
So, but I mean, no, I still love her. And
Yeah.
but then the flip side of that is she's been trying to get me onto Jane Austen for years,
Oh,
and
interesting.
it
Okay.
took her 23 years of married life before she finally got me to watch. I didn't read. She got me to watch Pride and
Okay. But
Prejudice.
yeah, yeah,
So
you watched. That's a
so I
good
can't
first
I
step.
can't preach too strongly.
Andy, this has been such a pleasure to get to chat to you, get to chat with you, get to meet you, get to ask you questions. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it so much. And thank you for the books, all the speaking that you started with RZIM and that you continue to do today.
You're welcome, Riley. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed our time together.